My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old, working as a pediatric nurse in Denver, Colorado. 4 years ago, on a freezing December night, my world shattered when my stepfather Marcus invaded my sanctuary and nearly destroyed everything I had built. But before I tell you about that night that changed everything, let me know where you're reading from. And please upvote if you want to hear more stories about triumph over adversity. My early childhood was filled with warmth and security until I turned 9. That's when my biological father, David, died in a motorcycle accident during his commute home from work, leaving my mother, Jennifer, and me to pick up the pieces of our fractured world. For 3 years, it was just us two against the world in our modest ranch house in suburban Aurora, just outside Denver. Mom worked double shifts as a restaurant manager to keep us financially stable, but despite her exhaustion, she never let me feel like a burden. We had Saturday morning pancake traditions, built blanket forts during thunderstorms, and she never missed a single soccer game or school play. Those years were tough financially, but emotionally, we were unbreakable. Everything shifted when I turned 12. Mom met Marcus at a customer service training seminar where she was learning new management techniques. He was the corporate trainer, a polished man in his early 40s with an impressive salary and seemingly endless charm. I still remember the first time she brought him to our house for dinner. He arrived with expensive wine for Mom and a professional art set for me, having heard from Mom that I loved to draw and paint. Marcus was sophisticated, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know both of us. Initially, I was guarded, still grieving my father's absence, but Marcus never pressured me. He took his time, often inviting me to join their dates to art museums or science centers. After 8 months of courtship, Marcus proposed during a romantic getaway to Aspen, and they married when I was 13. The ceremony was lavish and elegant, everything Mom had dreamed of but never thought she could afford. Marcus had wealth that dwarfed our previous lifestyle, and he moved us into his expansive Tudor-style home in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most prestigious neighborhoods. I received my own art studio in the converted basement, complete with professional easels, lighting, and every supply a young artist could imagine. For the first several months, everything felt like a fairy tale. The transformation began subtly. Marcus started consolidating their financial accounts, persuading Mom to quit her management job since his income was more than sufficient to support us all. He presented compelling arguments. She deserved to relax after years of struggling. They could save money by eliminating childcare expenses, and she could focus on creating a beautiful home for their new family. Mom agreed, perhaps too eagerly, desperate to believe she had finally found the security she had always craved. Then, Marcus began expressing concerns about Mom's friendships. Rachel was too negative with her constant complaining about her ex-husband. Lisa was irresponsible with money and would encourage Mom to develop expensive habits. Michelle was too dependent and would drain Mom's emotional energy. Gradually, Mom's social circle contracted as she stopped initiating contact to avoid Marcus's subtle criticisms. Phone conversations became shorter and less frequent, and visits nearly disappeared entirely. I watched Mom transform before my eyes. The confident woman who had once managed an entire restaurant staff now asked Marcus's permission before making any decision, no matter how trivial. Her vibrant wardrobe gave way to the conservative styles Marcus preferred. She stopped wearing the bold jewelry she had always loved and even changed her hairstyle to something more appropriate for a corporate executive's wife. The woman who used to sing while cooking now moved through the kitchen in silence. The first eruption of Marcus's temper occurred when I was 14. Mom had purchased a new throw pillow for the living room without consulting him first. It wasn't expensive, just a cheerful yellow accent piece she thought would brighten the space. But Marcus exploded with a fury that seemed completely disproportionate to the offense. He didn't strike her that time, but he swept his arm across the coffee table, sending magazines, candles, and decorative objects crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house as he screamed about fiscal irresponsibility and disrespect. Mom apologized profusely, returned the pillow the next day, and never made an independent purchase again. By my sophomore year of high school, I had perfected the art of invisibility. I joined every possible extracurricular activity, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and spent most weekends at friends' houses. When I was home, I retreated to my basement studio, emerging only when absolutely necessary. Marcus seemed content with this arrangement, likely preferring me out of his sight. My relationship with Mom deteriorated during these years as I resented her transformation and felt helpless watching her surrender pieces of herself. When I tried to discuss Marcus's controlling behavior, she defended him fiercely. "You don't understand adult relationships," she would insist. "Marcus provides for us. We're fortunate to have him." Eventually, I stopped trying to reach her, and we became strangers living in the same house. During my junior year, I discovered Mom covering a dark bruise on her wrist with makeup. She claimed she had slammed it in a car door, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine in the bathroom mirror. That moment confirmed what I had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Marcus had escalated from emotional to physical abuse. I pleaded with her to leave him, offering to get a job to help support us. But she refused, insisting it was an isolated incident caused by work stress. I knew better, but at 16, I felt powerless to help someone who wouldn't help herself. The next 2 years became a careful balancing act of survival and preparation. I maintained perfect grades, knowing education was my escape route. I researched universities far from Colorado, applied for every scholarship available, and worked part-time at a local bookstore to save money. Marcus seemed pleased with my academic achievements, viewing them as a reflection of his positive influence, and largely ignored me. Mom continued withdrawing into herself, becoming a ghost of the vibrant woman who had raised me alone for 3 years. When my acceptance letter from Northwestern University arrived with a substantial academic scholarship, I felt like I could finally breathe freely. Marcus was surprisingly supportive, probably because my success reflected well on his parenting and because he was eager to have me out of the house. Mom seemed torn between pride in my accomplishments and fear of being left alone with Marcus. The night before I left for Chicago, she came to my room after Marcus had gone to bed. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, sitting on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was little. "You're going to accomplish incredible things." There was something in her voice, a mixture of sadness and hope, that made my chest tighten. "Come with me," I said impulsively. "We could get an apartment together. You could start over in Chicago." She shook her head with that familiar look of resignation. "This is my life now, Sarah, but it doesn't have to be yours. Promise me you'll build something beautiful, no matter what happens here." The next morning, Marcus drove us to the airport in uncomfortable silence. He helped carry my boxes up to the dorm room, playing the role of devoted stepfather perfectly in front of my roommate and her parents. When it was time to say goodbye, Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "I love you more than you'll ever know," in my ear. Marcus gave me an awkward handshake and a check for emergencies. I never deposited it. My first semester at Northwestern was like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. I made friends who knew nothing about my home situation, joined the Pre-Med Honor Society, and even auditioned for the university theater group. My roommate Maya was studying journalism and introduced me to her diverse group of friends from all over the world. For the first time in years, I felt normal, unburdened by the constant tension of living with Marcus. I declared nursing as my major during sophomore year, driven by a desire to help vulnerable people who couldn't help themselves. My professors recognized my dedication and natural empathy with patients. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, who taught pediatric care, became my mentor and eventually a trusted friend. During office hours one afternoon, I finally opened up about my home situation. Instead of pity, she offered understanding and practical resources. She recommended books about trauma and family dynamics, connected me with support groups for children of abusive households, and encouraged me to seek counseling. "The patterns we learn in childhood shape us," she explained, "but they don't have to define our futures. Understanding them is the first step to breaking free." Communication with Mom became increasingly strained during college. Our phone calls were brief and superficial, always scheduled when Marcus was at work. She never shared anything meaningful about her daily life, deflecting my questions with vague reassurances that everything was fine. I visited home for holidays freshman year, but the atmosphere was so suffocating that I found excuses to stay in Chicago for most breaks afterward. Mom would visit me occasionally, always alone, always looking nervously over her shoulder, as if Marcus might appear behind her. To support myself, I worked in the university's student health center 20 hours a week. The calm, professional environment was therapeutic, and my supervisor was understanding about my class schedule. I was determined to be completely financially independent, refusing to accept any money connected to Marcus. I lived frugally, shopped at thrift stores, and learned to cook nutritious meals on a tight budget. During my junior year, I met Alex in my advanced anatomy class. He was studying to become a physical therapist, passionate about helping athletes recover from injuries. Unlike the casual relationships I had avoided before, Alex was patient and perceptive. He noticed when certain topics made me uncomfortable and never pushed for more information than I was ready to share. Gradually, I told him about my family, testing his reactions with small revelations before trusting him with the complete story. "Your mom needs professional help," he said after hearing about her situation, "but so do you. Growing up in that environment affects you too, even from a distance." With Alex's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist through the university's counseling center. Dr. Patricia helped me work through my complicated feelings of love, anger, and guilt regarding my mother and my fear and resentment toward Marcus. Slowly, I began to understand that I couldn't rescue Mom if she wasn't ready to save herself, but I could build my own healthy life and relationships. I graduated summa cum laude with Dr. Morrison writing glowing recommendations for nursing programs. Mom attended my graduation ceremony, sitting alone in the audience while Marcus claimed a work emergency prevented his attendance. She looked older than her 49 years, her once lustrous blonde hair now dull and prematurely streaked with gray, her posture permanently hunched as if perpetually bracing for impact. We went to dinner afterward, just the two of us, at a quiet Italian restaurant near campus. "I always knew you'd do something special," she said, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. "Your father would have been so proud." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm staying in Chicago. I found a position at Children's Memorial Hospital and an apartment in Lincoln Park. You could visit anytime. Stay as long as you want." She squeezed my hand, then withdrew it to nervously adjust her napkin. "I'll try. Things are just complicated with Marcus's business travel schedule and maintaining the house." Her voice trailed off, and I knew she was afraid to make promises she couldn't keep. We parted with long hugs and tentative plans for her to visit that summer. As I watched her taxi disappear into Chicago traffic, I wondered if I would ever get my real mother back. After graduation, I settled into my one-bedroom apartment in a converted brownstone in Lincoln Park, just a short train ride from the hospital. The rent stretched my entry-level nursing salary thin, but having my own secure space was worth every penny. My job at Children's Memorial was demanding but incredibly rewarding, working with young patients facing serious medical challenges. The experience reinforced my decision to specialize in pediatric trauma care. 6 months into my new life, I received an unexpected message from Alex. We had broken up amicably before graduation, both focused on our careers and uncertain about maintaining a long-distance relationship when he accepted a position in Seattle. His message was simple. He was moving back to Chicago for a better job opportunity and wondered if I'd like to get coffee and catch up. Our reunion coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into regular dates. Alex had matured during our time apart, more confident in his professional skills and clearer about his life goals. He now worked for a sports medicine clinic that treated both professional athletes and weekend warriors. We slipped back into our relationship with surprising ease, both more self-aware and better at communicating than we had been in college. One evening during a video call with Mom, I noticed a fading yellow bruise around her left eye. When I asked about it, she nervously adjusted her camera angle and claimed she had walked into a cabinet door while getting up in the middle of the night. The explanation might have been believable, if not for the way her eyes darted around nervously, clearly checking if Marcus was within earshot. "Mom," I said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If something's happening, I can help you." "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she insisted, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me about difficult patient you mentioned last week." The abrupt subject change was typical, but I decided not to push. Instead, I started calling more frequently at different times of day, hoping to catch her when she felt safer to talk. I also befriended Dr. Jennifer, a colleague who specialized in family trauma cases. Without breaking confidentiality about Mom, I asked general questions about how abuse escalates and what resources were available for victims. "The most dangerous time is when they try to leave," Dr. Jennifer explained during one lunch break. "That's when the abuser's control is threatened, and they often escalate to prevent losing their victim. Any escape plan needs to prioritize safety above everything else." I began researching domestic violence shelters in the Denver area, saving phone numbers and addresses in a password-protected document on my computer. I looked into legal options, restraining orders, and support groups, all while knowing that none of it would help unless Mom was willing to take that first terrifying step toward freedom. 4 months before my 25th birthday, Mom called while I was having dinner with Alex at my apartment. Her voice was trembling, barely audible. "He found the pamphlet," she whispered. "What pamphlet?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The one about the women's shelter. The one you mailed me. He went through my purse when I was showering." She was crying now, trying to stay quiet. "He says I'm ungrateful, that I'm planning to abandon him after everything he's provided for me. He destroyed my cell phone. I'm using the neighbor's landline while he's at the grocery store." My heart raced as adrenaline flooded my system. "Mom, listen to me carefully. Pack a small bag with just essentials. I'll arrange an Uber to take you to the bus station. You can come stay with me. We'll figure everything out once you're safe." "I can't just leave," she protested weakly. "The house, my entire life is here. What would people think?" "None of that matters if you're not safe," I insisted. "Please, Mom, I'm terrified of what he might do next." There was a long pause filled only with her quiet sobbing. "Maybe you're right," she finally said. "Let me think about it overnight. I'll call you tomorrow when he's at work." Alex, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, looked deeply concerned. "Do you think she's in immediate danger? Should we call the Denver police for a welfare check?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Marcus is calculating. He's never done anything that would get him arrested. If we call the police and nothing happens, it might just make things worse for her." We stayed up late discussing options, with Alex helping me refine a safety plan for Mom. I barely slept, anxiously waiting for her call the next day. When it finally came, my heart sank at her first words. "Everything's fine now," she said, her voice unnaturally cheerful and clearly rehearsed. Marcus and I had a productive conversation. He explained that he was just concerned about me being influenced by negative outside forces. "We're going to start marriage counseling to improve our communication." I could hear the lie in every syllable, could picture Marcus standing beside her, monitoring every word she spoke. "Mom, are you absolutely sure? You know you can tell me if—" "Completely sure," she interrupted quickly. "Oh, Marcus wants to say hello." Before I could protest, his voice came through the speaker, smooth and controlled as always. "Sarah, how wonderful to hear from you. I hope you're not filling your mother's head with destructive ideas about our relationship." "I just want her to be safe and happy," I replied carefully, my hands shaking with suppressed anger. "She is both those things with me," he said, a subtle but unmistakable threat underlying his pleasant tone. "Perhaps you should focus on your own life instead of trying to interfere in ours. Family relationships are sacred, Sarah. I hope you remember that." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in frustrated helplessness. Frantic with worry, I contacted the Denver Police Department and explained the situation in detail. The officer was sympathetic, but explained that without evidence of a crime or direct testimony from my mother claiming she was in danger, there was little they could do legally. "If she calls and says she's being threatened or hurt, we'll respond immediately," he assured me. "But we can't force help on someone who isn't asking for it." Frustrated and scared, I tried calling Mom repeatedly over the next few weeks, but always got voicemail. The few text messages I received were clearly composed under Marcus's supervision. Generic updates about home improvement projects and community events, nothing personal or meaningful. As my birthday approached, the knot of anxiety in my stomach grew tighter. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I was powerless to help from 1,000 miles away. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, reminiscent of my teenage years, but somehow worse because now I understood the true danger Mom faced. My 25th birthday fell on a Saturday in mid-December. Chicago was experiencing one of its harshest early winters on record, with temperatures dropping below zero and snow falling steadily for 3 days straight. Under normal circumstances, I might have planned a celebration with friends or a romantic dinner with Alex. Instead, I had agreed to let him take me out the following evening, as he had an unavoidable conference call with his Seattle colleagues that Saturday night. "I'll make it up to you tomorrow," he promised, kissing me goodbye that morning. "We'll have the most amazing belated birthday celebration ever." My colleagues at the hospital had surprised me with cupcakes and a thoughtful gift card at our shift change. Throughout the day, birthday wishes trickled in via text and social media from college friends and coworkers. I tried calling Mom several times, but as expected, there was no answer. I left a cheerful voicemail, making no mention of the tension from our last conversation, simply saying I loved her and hoped to hear from her soon. My apartment welcomed me with familiar comfort that evening. Located on the 4th floor of a secure building in Lincoln Park, it featured exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and large windows that offered a beautiful view of the city skyline. The building had excellent security with a doorman, keycard access, and solid locks on individual apartment doors. I had made the space my own with comfortable furniture, thriving plants, and framed artwork from local artists. It was small, but felt completely safe, a sanctuary from the chaos of my childhood. I treated myself to takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and settled on the couch, with a novel I'd been meaning to read for months. Around 10 p.m., Alex called to wish me happy birthday again, and promised that tomorrow's celebration would be worth the wait. By midnight, I had changed into my favorite pajamas and was drifting off to sleep, the novel abandoned on my nightstand. The aggressive pounding on my door jolted me awake from a deep sleep. Disoriented and groggy, I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 1:23 a.m. The pounding continued, growing more violent and insistent, now accompanied by a voice I recognized with horrifying clarity. "Open this door, Sarah!" Marcus's voice was slurred but unmistakable, filled with rage and alcohol. "I know you're in there, you manipulative little bitch!" Heart pounding, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Marcus stood in the hallway, his face flushed red with anger or alcohol or both. Behind him, partially hidden in the shadows, stood my mother, her expression a mask of absolute terror. Marcus pounded again, the door shuddering violently in its frame. "What are you doing here?" I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady while frantically typing a text to Alex with trembling hands. "It's after 1 a.m. You need to leave immediately." "We came to wish you happy birthday," Marcus replied with a grotesque attempt at joviality that made my skin crawl. "Open up, Sarah. Don't be rude to your family." "Please go away," I said louder, my voice cracking with fear. I will call the police if you don't leave right now. That's when something inside Marcus completely snapped. You ungrateful little whore! He roared, launching his entire body weight against the door with such tremendous force that the wood splintered around the deadbolt. 3 more powerful kicks, and the door gave way entirely, with Marcus stumbling into my apartment with murderous rage blazing in his bloodshot eyes. I backed away desperately, phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I'm calling 911, I warned, fingers already dialing the emergency number. Marcus lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his size and level of intoxication. He knocked the phone from my hand with brutal force, sending it skittering across the hardwood floor and under the couch. Before I could react or run, his meaty fingers tangled in my hair, yanking me forward so violently that white-hot pain exploded across my scalp. His other hand formed a fist that connected with my cheekbone with sickening force, sending stars exploding across my vision. Marcus, stop! My mother's voice rang out, thin and terrified from the doorway. Please, you're hurting her. This isn't what we came here for. He ignored her completely, dragging me by the hair across the living room and slamming me against the exposed brick wall. My head cracked against the hard surface, dazing me momentarily and making my vision blur. I tried to fight back desperately, clawing at his face and kicking at his shins, but Marcus outweighed me by at least 120 pounds and was fueled by years of suppressed rage. Mom, help me! I screamed, making direct eye contact with her over Marcus's broad shoulder. She stood frozen in the doorway, hands covering her mouth in horror, eyes wide with terror, but her body completely immobilized by years of learned helplessness. Please, Mom, do something! Marcus spun me around roughly, grabbed my right arm and twisted it behind my back, pushing upward with savage, deliberate force. There was a sickening pop as my shoulder dislocated, followed by pain so intense and overwhelming that my vision tunneled to pinpricks of light in an ocean of darkness. I screamed, the sound primal and agonized, echoing off the brick walls. This is what happens when you try to destroy a family, Marcus hissed directly in my ear, his breath hot and reeking of whiskey and rage. This is exactly what you deserve for trying to turn her against me. He slammed me against the wall again, my already injured shoulder taking the full brunt of the impact. The pain was blinding and nauseating, making bile rise in my throat. I felt something crack in my ribcage as he punched me again, this time in the side with his full strength. Another devastating blow caught my temple, sending me sprawling helplessly to the floor. Through swollen, rapidly closing eyes, I saw my phone just inches from my outstretched left hand. With the last reserves of my strength and consciousness, I lunged for it desperately, my fingers finding the emergency SOS button I had programmed months earlier. 3 quick presses sent my exact location to emergency services and automatically dialed 911. Marcus's boot connected with my ribs again with brutal force, and I curled into a tight protective ball, tasting blood, feeling consciousness slipping away like sand through my fingers. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me completely was my mother's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth forming words I could no longer hear over the roaring in my ears. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder and more urgent, then fading as I slipped into merciful unconsciousness. The steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor gradually pulled me from the darkness. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I managed to force them open to a blur of white ceiling tiles and harsh fluorescent lights. Pain radiated from what felt like every inch of my body, but particularly from my right shoulder and rib cage. A warm, familiar pressure on my left hand drew my attention, and I turned my head slightly to see Alex sitting beside the hospital bed, his fingers intertwined with mine, his head bowed in what looked like exhausted prayer. Alex. I tried to say, but it came out as barely a whisper. His head snapped up immediately, relief washing over his tired, worried features. Sarah, he whispered, leaning closer to the bed. Thank God you're awake. Let me get the nurse right away. He pressed the call button, and moments later a nurse bustled in, followed closely by a doctor in a crisp white coat. They checked my vital signs thoroughly, asked me questions to assess my cognitive function, and carefully explained the extent of my injuries. You have a dislocated right shoulder, which we reduced while you were unconscious. You were unconscious, the doctor explained in a gentle but professional tone. 3 fractured ribs on your right side, significant facial contusions, and a moderate concussion. You were extremely fortunate that the police arrived when they did, based on the severity of the assault. Do you remember what happened to you? The nurse asked kindly. The memories flooded back in horrifying, vivid detail. Marcus breaking down my door, the first devastating punch, my mother watching helplessly, the sickening pop of my shoulder. I nodded slowly, wincing at the pain the movement caused throughout my skull. Marcus, I managed to croak. My stepfather attacked me. My mother was there too, but she didn't participate. Are they? Your stepfather is in custody, Alex said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The police arrested him at the scene. Your mother is in the waiting room downstairs. She's been here all night, but she was afraid to come into your room. A police detective arrived shortly after, a woman with kind but determined eyes and a thick notebook. She introduced herself as Detective Martinez and explained that she needed my statement while the events were still fresh in my memory. With Alex holding my hand for support and strength, I recounted everything from the midnight pounding on my door to losing consciousness as sirens approached. My voice was hoarse and weak, but I was determined to tell every detail clearly. We have your stepfather in custody on multiple felony charges, including breaking and entering, assault and battery with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and domestic violence, Detective Martinez confirmed, making notes in her book. Your emergency call recorded parts of the attack, and the evidence of forced entry is overwhelming. Your injuries and the medical report will strongly support the case. The question now is whether you want to press charges to the fullest extent possible. Yes, I said without any hesitation whatsoever. I want him prosecuted for everything he's done, not just to me, but to my mother for all these years. Detective Martinez nodded approvingly. Good. Too often in domestic violence cases, victims are afraid to move forward with prosecution. There will be extensive paperwork to complete when you're feeling stronger, and we'll also need to discuss obtaining a restraining order for your protection. After she left, Alex filled in the gaps in my memory about what had happened after I lost consciousness. He had received my partial, panicked text message and immediately called the police when I didn't answer his frantic callbacks. He had arrived at my apartment building shortly after the ambulance, finding the door completely destroyed and blood spattered on the brick wall and hardwood floor. The police had Marcus handcuffed in a patrol car, and paramedics were trying to calm my hysterical mother while they worked on my unconscious form. She's been in complete shock, Alex said gently, referring to my mother, alternating between uncontrollable crying and completely shutting down emotionally. She gave a detailed statement to the police that confirms everything you experienced and more. I think she's finally ready to face the truth about what Marcus has been doing to both of you. I was still processing this information when a soft, hesitant knock came at the hospital room door. My mother stood there looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her, her face pale and drawn, with dark circles beneath red, puffy eyes. Can I please come in? She asked hesitantly, her voice barely audible. Alex looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was emotionally prepared for this conversation. Eric squeezed my hand reassuringly, then stood up from his chair. I'll go get some coffee and give you two some privacy to talk. As the door closed softly behind him, Mom approached the bed slowly, as if afraid I might ask her to leave. When she saw my face clearly for the first time, the extensive bruising now turning deep purple and yellow, she covered her mouth with both hands as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so incredibly sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking completely. Sarah, I'm so sorry for everything. I should have protected you. I should have stopped him. I should have left him years ago. Part of me wanted to turn away, to reject her apology as too little, too late. But the larger part of me recognized what I had been trained to see in my patients' families. The haunted look in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she unconsciously flinched at sudden movements. These were classic signs of long-term trauma that I had somehow overlooked in my own mother. Sit down, Mom, I said, gesturing weakly to the chair Alex had vacated. She perched nervously on the edge, hands twisting anxiously in her lap, like a frightened child. I never thought he would actually hurt you, she said, staring down at her hands. He threatened to hurt you so many times over the years, but I thought it was just manipulation, just another way to control me. I thought if I stayed with him, if I did everything he demanded, he would leave you alone, and you could build your own life safely. How long has he been hurting you? I asked, though I already suspected I knew the answer from years of observation. Since about 2 years after we got married, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It started with aggressive grabbing, shaking, then escalated to slapping that he would immediately apologize for and promise never to do again. By the time it became regular and severe, I was completely trapped. He controlled every penny of our money, had isolated me from every friend I'd ever had, and had convinced me I was worthless and incredibly lucky to have him. She took a shuddering breath before continuing. He threatened to kill you if I ever tried to leave him. He said he would track you down no matter where you went, no matter how far you ran. I believed him completely, Sarah. I stayed and endured years of abuse because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. But in the end, I failed anyway. This was the twisted, heartbreaking logic of abuse victims that I had studied extensively but never fully understood until this moment. My mother had endured over a decade of systematic torment, believing it was the only way to protect me, while I had spent years resenting her for not having the strength to leave. The irony was devastating. What made him come after me that night? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The birthday card, she replied, fresh tears starting to fall. The one you sent with the note, saying your door was always open if I needed a safe place to stay. Marcus found it in my purse and went into an absolute rage. He had been drinking heavily all evening, getting angrier and more violent. He kept screaming that you were trying to steal me away from him, destroy our marriage, turn me against him. He forced me into the car at gunpoint and said he was going to teach you a permanent lesson about interfering in our family. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands with years of suppressed guilt and terror. I should have fought him. I should have called the police. When he started attacking you, I just froze completely. I've never hated myself more than I did in that moment, watching him hurt you while I stood there doing absolutely nothing. A nurse came in to check my pain levels and administer additional medication. By the time she left, my mother had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes remained haunted and red-rimmed. The police asked if I'm going to press charges against him too, she told me quietly. I told them absolutely yes. I'm going to testify against him for everything he's done to both of us. I'm done being afraid, Sarah. It took seeing him nearly kill you to finally understand that there's no protecting anyone by staying silent. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer, arrived that afternoon, having heard about the assault from Alex. She brought comprehensive resources for both Mom and me. Information about victim services, therapy options, specialized support groups. More importantly, she connected us with Amanda, a lawyer who specialized exclusively in domestic violence cases and had an excellent track record of successful prosecutions. Amanda visited me in the hospital the following day, explaining the legal process that lay ahead of us. Marcus has been denied bail due to the extreme severity of the attack and the fact that he represents a clear flight risk, she informed us. The prosecutor is charging him with multiple felonies that could result in decades in prison. With your testimony, your mother's testimony, plus all the physical evidence, we have an extremely strong case that should result in conviction. Mom stayed in a hotel near the hospital, visiting me daily as I slowly recovered from my injuries. We talked more openly and honestly than we had in over a decade. These were painful conversations about the past, but also tentative, hopeful ones about the future. She agreed to begin seeing a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse recovery, which would be the first step in a very long healing process for both of us. After 6 days in the hospital, I was finally discharged with my arm in a sling, prescriptions for pain management, and appointments for extensive follow-up care. Alex insisted I stay at his apartment until mine was completely repaired and secured with much better locks and a security system. Mom came too, taking Alex's spare room while I occupied his bed, and he slept on the couch despite my repeated protests. In those first weeks of recovery, as my body slowly healed and the legal case against Marcus took shape, Mom and I began the delicate, complicated process of rebuilding our fractured relationship. There were moments of unexpected tension when years of unspoken resentment bubbled to the surface, but also moments of genuine connection that reminded us of who we had been before Marcus entered our lives. We were two survivors now, bound together by shared trauma, but also by the possibility of freedom from Marcus's long shadow. 4 months after the attack, I stood outside the Denver County Courthouse on a crisp spring morning, my hand gripping Alex's tightly for support. My shoulder had healed enough that I no longer needed the sling, though certain movements still caused significant pain, and the physical therapist warned me that I might always have some limitation in that joint, a permanent reminder of that terrible night. The courthouse was imposing and intimidating, with its granite columns and broad steps designed to project authority and power. Inside, the polished marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps, whispered conversations, and the occasional commanding voice calling case numbers or names. The air carried the scent of furniture polish mixed with an unmistakable undercurrent of anxiety. Amanda met us in the lobby, looking professional and confident in a navy blue suit, her briefcase bulging with documents and evidence. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her experienced eyes evaluating my emotional state carefully. I nodded, adjusting the collar of my own carefully chosen suit, selected to project strength and credibility. As ready as I'll ever be. Mom joined us moments later, having arrived separately from the domestic violence shelter where she had been staying for the past month. The weeks of safety, counseling, and support had begun to transform her in remarkable ways. She stood straighter, made more consistent eye contact, and spoke with greater confidence than I had seen in years. The shelter had connected her with job training and legal assistance to help her navigate the divorce process. "Marcus is already inside with his defense team," Amanda informed us as we walked toward the courtroom. "Remember everything we practiced during preparation. Answer questions directly and honestly. Don't let them provoke emotional responses that might undermine your credibility. We have the facts and overwhelming evidence on our side." The courtroom fell completely silent as we entered, with all eyes turning to assess and evaluate us. Marcus sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He looked more like a successful corporate executive than a man accused of brutal domestic violence. Beside him sat his attorney, Robert Thompson, known throughout Denver for representing wealthy clients and securing favorable outcomes through aggressive, often ruthless tactics. Marcus's eyes met mine briefly across the courtroom, a flash of undisguised contempt crossing his features before he quickly composed himself into a mask of false respectability. I refused to look away, holding his gaze steadily until he turned to whisper something to his high-priced attorney. That small victory steadied my nerves as we took our seats behind the prosecution table. The proceedings began with opening statements that painted two completely different versions of reality. The prosecutor, David Rodriguez, outlined the case clearly and forcefully, detailing the break-in, the savage assault, and my extensive injuries. He highlighted Marcus's long history of controlling and abusive behavior toward my mother and described the premeditated nature of his attack on me. Thompson's opening statement painted a vastly different and completely fabricated picture. Marcus, he claimed, was a concerned stepfather who had discovered that I was psychologically manipulating my mother, trying to destroy their marriage out of jealousy and resentment. According to this fictional narrative, he had gone to my apartment to have a reasonable conversation that escalated when I became hysterical and physically attacked him first, forcing him to defend himself. The complete fabrication was so outrageous and divorced from reality that I had to grip the bench tightly to keep from objecting out loud. They're going to try to twist and distort everything. Amanda whispered to me quietly, "Let the evidence and testimony speak for themselves. The truth always emerges." When called to testify, I walked to the witness stand with deliberate calm, swore to tell the whole truth, and faced the courtroom with as much composure as I could muster. For nearly 3 hours, I answered the prosecutor's detailed questions, describing my childhood after Marcus entered our lives, the escalating pattern of control and abuse, the isolation of my mother, and finally, in excruciating and painful detail, the events of that December night that changed everything. "At any point," Rodriguez asked clearly, "did you attack, threaten, or provoke Mr. Sullivan prior to him breaking down your apartment door?" "No," I stated firmly and without hesitation. "I never even opened the door. I asked him repeatedly to leave and told him I would call the police if he didn't go away immediately." Thompson's cross-examination was exactly as brutal and manipulative as Amanda had prepared me for. Aggressive, designed to confuse and provoke emotional responses that might make me appear unstable or vindictive. "Isn't it true, Miss Chen, that you have been systematically trying to separate your mother from your stepfather for years?" he demanded in an accusatory tone. "I have been trying to help my mother escape from an abusive relationship," I corrected calmly, refusing to be baited. "And you sent materials about leaving one's spouse directly to your mother's home, knowing they would likely be discovered by Mr. Sullivan, correct?" "I sent information about domestic violence resources because I feared for her safety based on years of observation." He attempted to paint me as vindictive and manipulative, resentful of Marcus's authority in our household, determined to destroy their marriage out of jealousy and spite. With each aggressive question, I took a deep breath before answering, sticking strictly to facts, refusing to be provoked into anger or emotional outbursts. My mother's testimony the following day was both heartbreaking and incredibly powerful. Her voice shook initially as she described 13 years of escalating abuse, financial control, and social isolation, but grew stronger and more confident as she detailed Marcus's threats, the systematic destruction of her independence, and finally the night he forced her at gunpoint to accompany him to my apartment. He said he was going to teach Sarah a permanent lesson for trying to turn me against him, she testified clearly. I was terrified he would seriously hurt her, but too afraid of the consequences to defy him directly. When he started brutally attacking her, I completely froze. It was like watching my worst nightmare unfold and being powerless to stop it. Thompson's attempt to discredit her by suggesting she was mentally unstable or seeking financial gain through divorce proceedings backfired spectacularly when Mom calmly described how Marcus had systematically ensured she had no access to money, no credit in her own name, and no way to support herself independently if she tried to leave. The medical evidence was presented next. Graphic photographs of my injuries, the emergency room physician's detailed report documenting the dislocated shoulder, fractured ribs, concussion, and facial contusions. The doctor testified about the significant force required to cause such extensive injuries, making it clear that this was no accident or minor scuffle. The jury visibly reacted to the photographic evidence, with several members looking at Marcus with undisguised disgust and horror. Officer Martinez and her partner described in detail the scene they discovered at my apartment. The completely destroyed door, blood spattered on the brick wall, my unconscious form on the floor, and Marcus still in a violent rage as they restrained and arrested him. The partial recording from my emergency call was played in the silent courtroom, my desperate screams and Marcus's threatening, rage-filled voice filling the space. The sound was so chilling that even the bailiff looked visibly shaken. Throughout the week-long trial, I endured Marcus's cold, intimidating stare each day, but refused to be cowed or silenced. Alex sat beside me constantly, his steady presence serving as an anchor. My colleagues from Children's Memorial came to show their support, as did Dr. Morrison, who had driven up from Northwestern University specifically to be there for me. On the final day, during closing arguments, I requested permission to address the court directly. The judge, after conferring with both attorneys, granted my request. Standing before the jury, I spoke from my heart about the broader implications of the case. What happened to me that night was not an isolated incident of rage or a family dispute that got out of hand. It was the culmination of over a decade of systematic control, manipulation, and abuse. My stepfather didn't just attack me physically that night. He spent years methodically destroying my mother's sense of self-worth, isolating her from every support system, and convincing her that his abuse was somehow love and protection. Domestic violence thrives in silence, shame, and fear. Today, by speaking the truth publicly, my mother and I refuse to be silenced any longer. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning with their unanimous verdict. As the four women stood, the courtroom fell completely silent. The tension almost unbearable. On the charge of breaking and entering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault and battery with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of domestic violence, we find the defendant guilty. Relief washed over me so intensely that I nearly collapsed right there in the courtroom. Mom gripped my hand tightly, tears of relief and vindication streaming down her face. Marcus's carefully composed facade finally cracked completely, his face contorting with impotent rage as the bailiffs approached to take him back into custody. At the sentencing hearing 3 weeks later, the judge showed absolutely no leniency whatsoever. Mr. Sullivan, you have systematically used your position of trust and authority to terrorize your family for over a decade. You have shown no remorse, no accountability, and no recognition of the devastating harm you have caused. This court sentences you to 22 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. As they led Marcus away in shackles, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had carried for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. For the first time, since I was 12 years old, I could breathe freely, without the constant fear of the man who had cast such a long, dark shadow over our lives. 3 years after the trial, on a beautiful autumn morning, I stood before a small audience in the community room of the Denver Women's Resource Center. My hair had grown long since I had cut it short immediately after the attack, now falling in soft waves past my shoulders. The physical scars had faded significantly, though my right shoulder still ached during weather changes and would never regain its complete range of motion. My name is Sarah Chen, I began, looking out at the faces of women in various stages of their own healing journeys. And today I want to talk about the path from victim to survivor to someone who thrives. 3 years ago, I lay in a hospital bed, broken physically and emotionally, convinced that my life had been permanently destroyed. Today I stand before you not because the pain magically disappeared, but because I learned to carry it differently and transform it into something meaningful. The women watching me knew parts of my story already. Some had attended support groups I now facilitated on weekends. Others had received counseling at the Healing Path Center, the nonprofit organization I had founded after completing specialized training in trauma therapy. Following the trial, I had thrown myself into additional education, determined to turn my experience into something that could help others. Healing is not a straight line, I continued, my voice growing stronger. It's messy, non-linear, and unpredictable. There are setbacks and breakthroughs, often on the same day. There are moments when you feel strong and empowered, followed immediately by moments when you feel fragile and afraid. All of these responses are completely normal and valid. My mother sat in the front row, pride and love evident in her radiant smile. She had lived with Alex and me for 8 months after the trial, attending intensive therapy sessions 3 times a week, and gradually rediscovering her voice, her preferences, and her identity. Now, she had her own apartment just a few blocks from mine and worked full-time at a nonprofit that helped women develop job skills. Our relationship had been completely transformed through countless difficult conversations, shared tears, and eventually genuine forgiveness, not for Marcus, but for ourselves and each other. The hardest lesson I learned, I told the audience, was that you cannot save someone who is not ready to be saved, but you can create a safe space for them to come to when they are ready. You can leave a light on in the darkness and let them know they are not alone. Alex sat beside my mother, the simple gold band on my left hand catching the light when I gestured. Our engagement had been a carefully considered step, taken only after extensive discussion and couples counseling. Alex had been infinitely patient, understanding that trauma fundamentally changes a person's relationship with trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. He had never pushed or rushed me, simply remained steady and supportive as I worked through my healing process at my own pace. The physical recovery had been challenging and sometimes frustrating. Months of intensive physical therapy had restored most function to my shoulder, though certain movements remained uncomfortable. The nightmares had been worse than the physical injuries, vivid, terrifying recreations of the attack that left me drenched in sweat and shaking. With professional therapy, medication, and Alex's patient support, they had gradually decreased in frequency and intensity. Trauma lives in the body, I explained to the group, drawing on both my personal experience and professional training. It affects us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. True healing must address all these dimensions simultaneously. I had practiced what I preached, combining traditional talk therapy with yoga, meditation, art therapy, and even horseback riding. Each modality had contributed something valuable to my recovery process. My mother had found her own unique path to healing and rediscovery. After decades of having her preferences dismissed and her identity suppressed by Marcus, she had systematically begun rediscovering herself. Her favorite foods, colors, music, books, and activities. She had started wearing bright, colorful clothing again, taken up pottery classes, joined a hiking group, and even begun dating a kind, gentle man she had met at her book club. Each small act of self-determination was a victory, a reclamation of the person Marcus had tried to destroy. The turning point in my healing journey, I continued, came when I realized that holding on to hatred and rage toward my abuser was keeping me emotionally connected to him. By focusing my energy on anger and revenge fantasies, I was allowing him to continue controlling my emotional life from his prison cell. True freedom came with letting go, not of accountability or justice, but of the corrosive, destructive power of hatred. This had been perhaps the most difficult aspect of my recovery process. The rage had felt righteous, protective, and completely justified. Learning to release it without minimizing the harm that had been done required skilled therapeutic guidance and the support of others who understood from their own lived experience. The Healing Path Center had grown far beyond my initial modest vision. We now offered individual counseling, group therapy sessions, career development workshops, financial literacy classes, and transitional housing assistance. A network of volunteer attorneys provided legal guidance and representation. Former clients regularly returned as peer mentors and advocates, creating a powerful community of mutual support and empowerment. One remarkable success story was Jennifer, a woman in her early 30s who had attended one of my first public speaking engagements 2 years earlier. After 8 years with an abusive partner, she had found the courage to leave. Inspired partly by hearing my story and partly by connecting with our support services, now she volunteered at the center, using her background in social work to help other women navigate the complex systems they encountered when leaving abusive relationships. The greatest myth about domestic violence, I told the audience, is that it only happens to certain types of people, those who are weak, codependent, or somehow asking for it. The truth is that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of education, income, profession, or background. Victims don't need our judgment or criticism. They need our compassion, understanding, and practical support. As I concluded my presentation, I looked around at the faces before me, some bearing visible scars, others carrying wounds invisible to the eye, but no less real and significant. Each person represented both a tragedy and a triumph, lives disrupted and damaged by violence, but refusing to be permanently defined by it. My stepfather took many things from me and my mother, I said in closing. Years of peace and security, our sense of safety, our physical health, our trust in relationships. But he failed to take what matters most, our fundamental capacity to heal, to love, to grow, and to build something meaningful from the wreckage. That resilience isn't something special or unique to me. It lives in every single one of you. It's the basic human ability to begin again, no matter how many times we've been broken. The applause was warm and sustained as I finished, with several women wiping away tears. As they gathered around afterward to speak with me individually, sharing their own stories, struggles, and small victories, I felt the familiar mixture of profound sadness and genuine hope that now characterized my work. Each conversation reminded me that healing happens through human connection, not in isolation. We recover ourselves through the process of helping others recover. Later that evening, Alex and I hosted a small dinner party at our apartment. My mother brought her famous apple crisp. Dr. Jennifer came with her husband, and Dr. Morrison drove up from Northwestern. Surrounded by this chosen family of people who had supported us through the darkest times, I reflected on how far we had all traveled on our respective healing journeys. A toast, Alex suggested, raising his wine glass with a warm smile. To Sarah, whose courage and resilience continue to inspire everyone around her. I shook my head, raising my own glass toward the group. To all of us, for choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair, and healing over hatred, every single day. As conversation and laughter filled the apartment that had once been the site of such devastating violence, I felt the profound truth of what I had told the women earlier that day. Trauma changes you permanently and irrevocably. There is no returning to who you were before. But with support, determination, professional help, and time, you can build something new and deeply meaningful from the pieces that remain. What happened that December night 4 years ago will always be part of my story. But it is no longer the defining chapter. It is simply one part of a much larger, more complex narrative about resilience, compassion, recovery, and the transformative power of breaking the silence that protects abusers and isolates victims. If this story has touched you in any way, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with overcoming adversity, or share resources that have helped you through difficult times. Remember that upvoting and sharing helps these stories reach others who may feel alone and hopeless in their struggles. Thank you for reading. And please remember, no matter what you have endured, healing is always possible, support is available, and you are never truly alone in your journey toward freedom and recovery.